Hi, I'm Dr. Katie McGettigan. I'm a lecturer in American Literature at Royal Holloway, University of London, and I'm going to talk to you today about Theodore Dreiser's Sister Carrie. And I'm going to talk about one of the contexts for Sister Carrie. And it's a bit of a strange context because it's a context that doesn't really appear in the book, or rather it doesn't appear directly in the book. But what I'm going to argue is that it does inform Dreiser's novel in certain important structural ways. And that context is the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. So in 1893, Chicago was elected to hold a huge exhibition of stalls, of manufacturing, of theatricals from around the world. All of these people came to Chicago. It's a bit like a version of the Great Exhibition that happens in London in 1851. And they build a whole new kind of pavilion just outside the city for this exhibition that's big and white, and it's a huge tourist attraction. And one of the biggest attractions of this fair is the world's first Ferris Wheel. So all those Ferris wheels that you're used to seeing at fairgrounds or amusement parks, the first one of those is at the Chicago World's Exhibition in 1893. Dreiser actually went to this exposition. He was working for a newspaper at the time, and he goes with a party of school teachers to report on it. And he's really kind of amazed and marvelled at the beautiful big white buildings they've built and at the Ferris Wheel. So you might be thinking, this World's Fair in Chicago happens in 1893, but Sister Carrie is set in Chicago in 1889. And so the World's Fair hasn't happened yet, so it doesn't actually feature in the novel at all. It's not literally depicted. However, the novel is written in 1899, by which time Dreiser was certainly associating Chicago with the World's Fair. So what I'd like to think about is the way in which the World's Fair, and perhaps specifically the Ferris Wheel, this idea of the wheel that circles round and round, is informing Sister Carrie. I think that Dreiser is thinking about the Ferris Wheel, and perhaps more broadly about the idea of a wheel of fortune when he's thinking about what happens to the characters in Sister Carrie. So you might be familiar with this metaphor of the wheel of fortune. It's this idea that in our lives, sometimes we're on the up, we're rising around the wheel, and at other times we're falling, we're going to the bottom. And we can't really control that this is happening. There's just a kind of insistent rise and fall. Things go up and down. And we see this rise and fall also in the fate of the characters in Sister Carrie, in the kind of society that Dreiser is depicting, in which class boundaries are in some ways becoming more fluid, in which there is a possibility to rise through the middle classes if you find a way to make money. There's also a possibility to fall. And we see this happening to the characters. So Carrie, obviously, through her associations, first with Drouet, the salesman, and then with Hurstwood, and then into her career as an actress, which they facilitate, she rises. She starts out very poor, and she ends up being wealthy, being admired, being on stage, although perhaps not happy, as I'm going to discuss right at the end of this video. In contrast, Hurstwood has this spectacular fall. He starts out as a wealthy person working in a successful business, but he steals that money from his employer, and this starts a kind of fall downwards, both financially, but also socially. He ends up having to take the job driving the streetcars to break the strike. He's exposed to the violence, and he ends up, again, alone. Carrie has abandoned him because he can no longer provide the life that she wishes. So we do in some ways see that rise and fall of the Wheel of Fortune and indeed the Ferris Wheel. So I'm wondering, and I think, that Dreiser might have had this idea of the Ferris Wheel in mind when he's writing Sister Carrie. However, against that image of the rise and fall, the perpetual motion of people that Dreiser is working with, he's also got this competing image of stasis. So against the Ferris Wheel, I think, we have the rocking chair. There's a lot of mentions of rocking chairs in Sister Carrie. Carrie starts out in her sister's home when she first moves to Chicago, sitting in the rocking chair, thinking about what life with Drouet might offer. She sits and rocks in the chair in the apartment that Drouet rents for her, where they ultimately live together, thinking about whether she is satisfied with her life. And at the very end, we also see her in the rocking chair when she seems to have everything she's ever wanted. She has a career as an actress, she has her beautiful clothes, she has lots of money, and yet she's still not happy. She's still just rocking. And Dreiser writes, "In your rocking chair, by your window, shall you dream such happiness as you may never feel." And we might want to think about what happens when you're in a rocking chair. You move, yes, you move backwards and you move forwards, but you don't actually go anywhere. You're just moving on the spot, backwards and forwards. You might feel like you're progressing, but you're actually just pulled back to where you are. So we might want to think then, or what you have to think as readers, is whether Sister Carrie is a novel about movement, about the possibilities of movement, or whether it's really a novel about stasis, where people seem to move, seem to change, but in fact, really deep down, end up in the same place as right where they started.